Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Psyched podcast. I'm your host, Kaia Roman, with a very special guest, our very first ever male guest, Rick Doblin, and maybe our last male guest, who knows?
Depends on how I do, huh?
So very, very honored to have Rick with us on the podcast today. This man hardly needs an introduction. You're kind of an icon in our world, Rick. But let me give you guys just his little bio before we get into this conversation. So Rick Doblin, Ph.D., founded the nonprofit Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, known to all of us as MAPS, in 1986, which has grown from a one-man project to an international psychedelic pharmaceutical company with over 50 full-time staff. He received his doctorate in public policy from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, where he wrote his dissertation on the regulation of psychedelic research and prescription use. His undergraduate thesis at New College of Florida, which is my fellow alma mater as well, was a 25-year follow-up to the classic Good Friday experiment, which evaluated the potential of psychedelics to catalyze religious experiences. Rick studied with Stanislav Grof and was among the first to be certified as a holotropic breathwork practitioner. Rick's professional goal is to become a legally licensed psychedelic psychotherapist by developing legal contexts for the safe uses of psychedelics and marijuana as prescription medicines, and also for personal growth, spirituality, and creativity. And if you watch the episode of How to Change Your Mind on Netflix about MDMA, you'll hear Rick at the end of his interview talk about, after 36 years of working super hard to get MDMA legalized, he says something along the lines of, I've just been doing all of this so that I could become an MDMA practitioner and help people heal. So, talk about dedication to a mission to achieve a very simple goal. But really with Rick, and I speak from personal experience, this man has such a big heart and such a big mission that it seems to me to be big enough to heal the whole world. I had my own, this was not a microdose moment, recently at Wonderland, accidentally, unexpectedly, and was very, very fortunate to have Rick as my guide. And as you can imagine, he was the most supportive, grounding, kind, and expert guide on earth I could have ever asked for. So I really feel like, Rick, I got to see into your heart through that experience. And, a lot of people are in the public eye and they're giving speeches and they're doing this work, and you don't really know, how authentic is this person's heart and their mission. But I can tell you all from my personal experience that this man is the real deal. And I just appreciate you so much, Rick. Ever since I rented a house from you back in 1997 at New College, your incredible house in Sarasota that was designed for psychedelic experiences, I have watched you be just unwavering in your dedication to this cause. So I'm really honored that you made the time to have this conversation with me. And I want to start with a question. Now that so many of us are finally catching up to what you knew decades ago, why did you choose in 1986, of all the compounds that you could have really focused on for legalization, why did you choose MDMA? Why not plant medicines? Why not LSD? Why MDMA?
Okay. Well, first, thank you for that really kind introduction. And it was a pleasure to spend a bunch of time with you once the microdose turned out to be more of a macrodose than a microdose. And I do just want to add one thing, which was you said about 50 subjects, 50 staff. But we now have about 190 or so.
You need to update your LinkedIn.
Yeah, because that's
190. Wow, you've really grown.
There's about almost 40 at the MAPS nonprofit, but then about 155 at the MAPS Public Benefit Corp, our pharmaceutical arm.
Amazing.
All right, so how did I choose MDMA? Well, when I first decided to focus my life on psychedelics, which was in 1972 when I was 18, I had only experienced LSD, mescaline, and psilocybin. Okay. I had no knowledge at all about MDMA. So it was 10 years, and that's where I dropped out of New College and in the middle of my first year and didn't return for 10 years.
Right.
And when I returned in 1982, my first semester was out in California at Esalen and studying with Stan Groff and Christina Groff. And I was going to design a curriculum to become a psychedelic psychotherapist. And I thought that would be great to start with Stan to do that. And that's where I learned about MDMA. And I initially underestimated it because when I was told about MDMA, I was told that it helped you to feel love, it helped you to feel connected, it helped you to deal with difficult emotions. And I thought, well, I am in love. I do feel connected. It supposedly helps you make a better listener. I thought I'm a really good listener, and so that was it. Just it wasn't in this context of, oh, you're going to have this spiritual experience and your ego is going to dissolve and all this. It was a different thing.
Right.
And then I saw a group of people doing MDMA in a circle and talking to each other. And I just was like, well, how profound this can be. This is maybe like a Quaalude or a tranquilizer or something that you can talk to each other. You take a significant amount of MDMA, I mean, significant amount of a classic psychedelic like LSD or psilocybin, and you can't talk. So here it was, people talking, their ego intact. I felt like, how profound can this be? So I like to say that I was stupid enough to underestimate it, but smart enough to buy some.
Okay.
Okay.
Right
And
on
so
that
then,
line.
yeah. And so when I did try it, what I learned about it also was that it was an underground therapy drug called Adam,
Okay.
which had used in that way since the middle 70s, and that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people had tried it. And that the reports were great, but that it escaped from those circumstances and had become used in more public settings as a party drug, ecstasy.
Got it.
So the moment that I learned about it, I learned that it was that its legal status was temporary. This was during the time of Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan and the escalation of the drug war, and so it was doomed as it was. But my experience of it when I first tried it was just profound. I was shocked at how deep it went, how profound it was, and how I wasn't as good of a listener as I thought I was, and I could feel more loving connections both to myself and to others, and that it did really help me get grounded and opened up my emotionality, and it was just absolutely profound. So the very first time I took it, I thought, this has got enormous potential. Now, when it came time to try to protect it, so I started a nonprofit before MAPS in 1984 in Sarasota, Earth Metabolic Design Lab, and that was a nonprofit designed to really focus on preparing for the eventual effort by DEA to criminalize and then to try to block that.
You knew it was coming.
It was clear because it was used as ecstasy in public settings, and we knew it was coming. They didn't know that the DEA didn't know about therapeutic use, but we knew about recreational use, and we knew the DEA knew about that. So the reason that I sort of wanted to make a stand on MDMA and why I think that it's was the most effective drug to choose to go through the regulatory system first, and now we are basically completed 2 phase 3 studies, and we are ahead of everybody. Nobody else has even started a phase 3 study. So MDMA is the gentlest of all the psychedelics in the sense that it doesn't really produce hallucinations in the same way. It doesn't dissolve your sense of self in the same way that the classic psychedelics do. And in fact, for legal reasons, when we were trying to defend it against criminalization from FDA, from DEA, we came up with some new names like entactogen or empathogen. Like it wasn't technically a psychedelic. That was more of a legal strategy to try to say it was something. But MDMA is the most gentle of all the psychedelics. It's the easiest to integrate because it doesn't dissolve your ego in the same way. You can remember traumatic experiences in a way that enables you to express the emotions that were sort of blocked when the experience was happening, when people are focusing on survival.
Mm-hmm.
And it's incredibly profound and transformative. Now, so it's the gentlest of all the psychedelics, the easiest to integrate. Then the other part of it was that I saw how MDMA revitalized the underground psychedelic therapy movement.
Uh-huh.
So once I learned about it, it was a new tool that had been widely adopted in underground psychedelic therapy. So I learned already about its incredible therapeutic potential once I learned about it. But then the other part that's pretty important is that we're about training therapists. All of this is, the drug is not the treatment, it's the therapy that's the treatment.
Right.
So what we say is that the therapists who want to work with psychedelics will be more effective if they have tried the drug themselves.
Makes
It's not
sense.
that all the therapists who do MDMA are better than all the therapists who don't do MDMA. It's just all the therapists who want to work with MDMA will be more effective themselves if they had tried it.
Yeah.
Now, because it's the most gentle and the easiest to integrate, there's a lot less fear and resistance among psychiatrists and psychologists from trying MDMA than there would be from trying psilocybin or LSD.
Ayahuasca,
Right, so,
ibogaine. Yeah.
yeah. All of those are more challenging, more surrender, more overwhelm of your normal way of thinking. So I felt that we could work within psychiatry and psychotherapy and provide people with something that they would be more willing to experience than the classic psychedelics. And so all of that is why I thought MDMA would be the drug to go through the system first.
Okay.
Then the other question is, what is it for?
Yeah. I mean, you guys ended up doing the clinical trial for PTSD, but how did you even figure out that it helped with PTSD?
Yeah. So again, so it's a strategic analysis of what's the drug and what's the clinical indication. And there had to be a really good match there. So for PTSD, because psychedelics were so stigmatized and, we're trying to bring them up from the underground, we needed a patient population that the American public was sympathetic with.
Right.
So psychedelics are tremendous for substance abuse. LSD was used with alcoholics and heroin addicts in the late 60s. It looks really promising.
The 13th step, the secret 13th step in the 12-step program.
The surrender to the higher power, the making amends, all of that. But we tend in our culture to make the addicts the other. So even though psychedelics are terrific for working with people with substance use disorders with proper support and therapy, that wasn't going to be the indication.
Okay.
There were sort of two ideas. One was people who are facing existential anxiety from life-threatening illnesses.
Okay.
And so we're all going to be in that place of dying and of having to deal with that. And, all right. So that was one. The other alternative, again, was PTSD.
Okay.
So what we needed was sympathetic patients. We needed a disease for which the currently available medications helped some people, but left a lot of people still needing more treatment. We needed a disease that was very serious because, the therapy is going to be extensive. It's going to cost a lot of money. So we're going to need insurance companies to cover it. So we needed a disease that causes a lot of healthcare expenses.
Right.
So PTSD is perfect in that regard, in the sense that you have high stress and it causes all sorts of other physical illnesses. And you have panic reactions. You can go to the emergency room. You might even have suicide attempts. So,
and you're not able to work generally and contribute to the economy. And these are the things you have to think about when you're going for FDA approval, I guess.
Yes. And then the other final part, so all of that meant MDMA for PTSD, but then the final part that I didn't really know at the time, but we've learned since then, which makes it the perfect choice, is that PTSD changes people's brains. So when I first started this was before brain scans and, this was an early thing. So what we do know is that if you have PTSD, you have a hyperactive amygdala, the part of your brain that processes fear. You have a reduction in activity in the prefrontal cortex, where we think logically, so people can be triggered all the time. And you have a reduction of activity in the hippocampus, which is where we put memories into long-term storage. The thing about PTSD is the trauma is always happening or always about to happen, and it's never fully processed in the past. And people feel isolated from other humans, and they withdraw, and
Yeah.
humans hurt them.
Well,
Yeah.
it's
So
awful.
it turns out that MDMA does exactly the opposite.
Hmm.
So MDMA reduces activity in the amygdala so that you can process fear. MDMA increases activity in the prefrontal cortex so you can think more logically about triggers. And MDMA increases connectivity between the hippocampus and the amygdala so you can take these fear-based emotions and move them away from always happening to in the past. So to put them into long-term storage.
Yeah.
And then MDMA releases oxytocin, which is the hormone of love, connection, nursing mothers. It's provides this sort of connection to other people and to oneself that has been so severely wounded in being traumatized.
Right.
All right, so all of
Amazing.
those things led to this strategic analysis of MDMA for PTSD.
Right. And then you had to test it, I guess, with clinical trials. It seemed like
Yeah.
it made sense from a science brain perspective. Then you went into the clinical trials. And I know you recently announced your phase 3 data. So maybe you could tell us what you found. Because I mean, I'm sure people are wondering if they haven't heard about that data is, okay, that sounds good, but does it last? And,
Yeah. Well,
who is it good for? I was personally very surprised by who you found your largest PTSD population to be. So maybe you could also speak to that.
yeah. Yeah, and I'll just add that does it last is a critical question for the insurance companies, because if you can
Right.
help people in a short-term intervention that's a lot of therapy, so it's very expensive. If it doesn't last, it's not worth it.
Right.
So it has to be durable.
Right.
And so where we're finding is that it really is durable. And that so here's our phase 2 results, and then I'll say in phase 3 you have to do 2 phase 3 studies.
Okay.
And so we have published let me say briefly with phase 2.
Okay.
Phase 2 took us 16 years, from 2000 to 2016. So 30 years
Oh my
from the
God.
time of the start of MAPS in 86, we had what's called the end of phase 2 meeting with FDA. And the purpose of phase 2 is these small pilot studies to figure out how you're going to design phase 3. The purpose of phase 3 is randomized controlled, placebo controlled double-blind studies to prove safety and efficacy. So what we learned in phase 2 is that the most important thing was that MDMA worked regardless of the cause of PTSD. MDMA assisted therapy. So the SSRIs work better in women than in men and failed in combat related PTSD.
Okay.
So our treatment worked in complex PTSD, in single assault, incident PTSD, in war related PTSD,
Right.
industrial accidents, shootings, school
Childhood
shootings,
trauma.
childhood trauma, complex PTSD. So
Yeah.
we discovered
Amazing.
that worked in all of those areas, that it had an acceptable safety profile,
Okay.
that we got a strong effect size. And then what we learned is that, unfortunately, my dissertation, the chapter on my dissertation that was about how to do a double-blind study with psychedelics, that was wrong. So I had this idea that we do full dose MDMA with therapy compared to low dose MDMA with therapy.
Okay.
And then the question was, what's the low dose that's high enough to cause some confusion, but not so high that it has a lot of therapeutic potential? Because then we'd never find a difference between the two groups. So we studied inactive placebo, 25 milligrams, 30 milligrams, 40 milligrams, 50 milligrams, 75, 100, 125, and 150. All right. And so what we discovered, that I was partially right, that these low doses of MDMA, 25, 30, 40, 50 milligrams, did produce some confusion. Did somebody have a full dose? Did they have a lower dose? Sometimes it would fool the therapist. They weren't sure.
Okay.
But the surprising part was that it turned out that lower doses made people uncomfortable. So the analogy is, you're about to take off in a plane and it's turbulent at the beginning, but then you get high enough and it's kind of smooth sailing. So we discovered that when you give therapy without any MDMA at all, that people have, on average, better results than when you give therapy with low dose MDMA.
Wow, that's a really
So
significant finding.
yeah, they still get better, but not as much. And
Right.
so this agitation, now it's not surprising because when you think about post-traumatic stress disorder, people self-medicate with marijuana, with alcohol, with
Mm,
opiates, but they
right.
don't self-medicate with stimulants.
Hmm.
Stimulants just brings things more to the surface. It
Yeah.
doesn't have the fear reduction. So low dose MDMA is more like a stimulant.
Okay.
Okay, so we discovered that that would not be an ideal choice for a double blind. Now, the other thing that we discovered in phase two, and this I think is really important for the therapists that are listening, which is that from the work with LSD and psilocybin in the 60s and the last 20 plus years research with psilocybin and other psychedelics, there's a correlation between the depth of the mystical experience and therapeutic outcomes.
Okay.
And that is not the case with MDMA.
Interesting.
So MDMA is fundamentally different in that you
Mm.
can have a mystical experience, and people score surprisingly high on the mystical experience questionnaire, which we use the exact same questionnaire in the psilocybin LSD research as in the MDMA research,
Okay.
but it's not correlated with therapeutic outcome because you're
Wow.
talking about traumas that happened in your life. You need
Yeah.
an ego to work through it.
Right.
Uh, so that I think was a really important factor that was not correlated. So when you're doing therapy with classic psychedelics, you kind of try to make it so people have a mystical experience if you can.
Right.
So we're not aiming in that direction at all.
But you
Right.
do have to make the dose high enough, sounds like.
Well, it has to be high enough for therapy, and that's also then often high enough for some people to have this kind of
Miss.
mystical experience.
Okay.
Yeah, and so
Okay.
that's kind of the overview
So that's
on
what you found
what
in
we learned
phase
for phase
two.
two. Now, there's one last thing that we found from phase two. So that the people that, so what we're comparing is the after the therapy is over, after the MDMA, the last MDMA session is over, we have 3 integrative sessions once a week. And
Mm.
then what's called the primary outcome measure is 2 months after the last MDMA session. So
Okay.
we didn't want it to be right after. People would say, "Oh, psychedelic afterglow,"
Yeah.
and
Yeah. I feel great.
yeah. So we didn't want that. It had to last at least 2 months, and then we also do a 12-month follow-up.
Oh, wow.
About as
Wonderful.
well. Okay, so what we learned is that 23% of the people that got therapy without MDMA or with low dose MDMA, 23% no longer qualified for a diagnosis of PTSD at the 2-month follow-up.
Okay.
So that's phenomenal. 42 hours of therapy, usually a
Yeah.
male team, can make a lot of difference. These are people that have failed on other drugs,
Right.
failed on
Nothing else worked for them.
psychotherapy, chronic severe PTSD. But the therapy alone without any drug helped 23% of them to no longer qualify for a diagnosis at the 2-month follow-up.
Okay.
So the therapists are really trying. Our therapy is really pretty good. But when you add MDMA, it goes up to 56%. No
Now
longer.
that's impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, so in phase two, then, and this is another very impressive thing, is that the 12-month follow-up, people on average were 67%, 2/3 no longer qualified for a diagnosis of PTSD.
It went up.
It went up. So not
Amazing.
only is it durable, but people have, well, you can maybe share this about your own experience
Yeah.
with me there, is that once you've had these experiences and you kind of survive them,
Yeah.
then it becomes easier to tap into kind of those emotions later.
Yes.
You've had them in an extreme way. You can say, okay, I can let it in. You've learned how to process it. So what we find is that people learn over time how to do kind of healing work without the drug. And
Hmm.
that's the essence of what we're trying to do. We don't say the drug is healing you or the therapy is healing you. It's you are healing yourself.
Right.
We're trying to give you this opportunity to be in a place of healing, but then you have to do the hard work.
Yes.
And you need in the integration process to learn how to keep doing it on your own without the drug. So
Yes.
the
And
result,
hopefully the amygdala stays in a less activated state and your prefrontal cortex is working better. And then over time, you get more confirmation like, oh, I can actually function properly. And I'm not going to let this PTSD or anxiety rule my life. And you access the memories and those tools that you gained from the experience, which definitely I have from my experience with you.
yeah. Yeah. So that's what we learned from phase two. And so in phase three, the first
Beautiful.
phase study we published in May 10th, 2021. And that was in Nature Medicine, one of the world's top journals. And the journal Science at the end of each year reviews all the science, and it's the most important scientific journal in the world. And they review the scientific breakthroughs of the year before, and they award 10 of them as the top 10 scientific breakthroughs of the year. There's one winner and 9 runner-ups, and the 9 runner-ups are not ranked in any way. So we get our first phase 3 results published in Nature Medicine in May 2021. And at the end of 2021, just about a year ago, Science comes out with their annual issue, and they say that one of the top 10 breakthroughs of the world was our paper about MDMA-assisted therapy. It's fantastic. And it was even more,
Congratulations. It's so
yeah,
amazing.
it was even sweeter because 20 years before, Science, the same journal, had published a paper that they never should have published, that they should have known was something screwy about it. But they published this paper that claimed that MDMA hurt dopamine.
Oh,
This
right.
in primates, and that then
Right.
it could cause Parkinson's.
It was
It never seemed
totally
right.
inaccurate data.
Well, yeah, after a year, they had to retract the paper because they couldn't
Mm.
replicate the results based on our criticism that it wasn't the same way people took it. And then they discovered that somehow mistakenly they had given methamphetamine instead of MDMA to these animals. And methamphetamine is stronger than MDMA. So again, you're
Right.
giving the wrong drug in super high doses, killing a bunch of the monkeys. So that sort of was, very scandalous, and that was
Mm.
a high watermark of the fears about MDMA
Right.
neurotoxicity. So anyway, so Science says 20 years later, this is one of the world's top 10 studies with MDMA. Fantastic. So
Yay.
what did we
So
discover?
nice. They
Yeah.
finally
So
came around.
yeah. So what we discovered is that 32% in the control group, which was therapy without any MDMA at all,
Okay.
32% no longer qualified for a diagnosis of PTSD at the 2-month follow-up.
Wonderful.
But when you add MDMA, now it's also 67%. So 2/3. So it's more than doubles again.
Right.
And in January of this coming year, 2023, we should get the long-term follow-up data
Okay.
from the first phase 3 study.
All
So
right.
I don't have that data to report, but
Yeah.
we're hoping that it will also continue to show improvement over time. So now our second phase 3 study, you have to do 2 phase 3 studies that are successful.
Okay.
Companies, you can do way more. It's just you need 2 successful ones. A bunch more can fail if you want, but we can't afford failure like that. And so
Yeah.
we have just finished on November 2nd was the last data in our second phase 3 study. And a few weeks ago was the data lock. And next week, we should be finding out whether it was statistically significant. We believe it's already successful from a safety point of view. There was an acceptable safety database. We believe there was no suicide attempts in anybody in the MDMA group or in the control group in this study. So we think that we are on a really good track towards FDA approval, but this durability question is really key for insurance coverage.
Right.
And so we will learn more next month about the durability of the first phase 3 study. And it'll probably take us more or less about a year, 10 months or something from now, or 9 months, because as I said, the last data point was November 2nd. And so that was 3 weeks after the last MDMA session. So now, a year and a week after November 2nd. So the middle of November 2023 is when we should have all of the data from the 1-year follow-up from the second phase 3 study.
Okay.
So that's where, and we're doing work in Europe and Brazil and Australia, moving forward a lot. So I think the results have been considered to be a breakthrough therapy by the FDA. It's a genuine novel advance, and the whether it will work in different cultures and different contexts in the same way is something that we need to be looking at before. But I guess I want to go back, since this is women and psychedelics, is that just to add that we talk a lot about the veterans and all of that, but 2/3 of the people in the study are women. It's mostly women who are sexually abused or childhood traumas,
Yeah.
mostly women that have PTSD, but
Yeah.
the men and the vets are what get most of the media attention.
Thank you so
And
much for bringing that up because I think that is just such an important point. You know, when people say PTSD, I think that we normally think of soldiers, but I really
yeah,
appreciate you speaking about that. It is unfortunately so common for women to have these experiences and to live with PTSD.
yeah, it's all too common, and I think the media attention on the veterans sort of distracts people from the understanding that it's mostly women that we're treating,
Yeah.
which also makes it so that the idea of the male-female co-therapy team
Yeah. Tell me
so
about
much
that.
sense. Well, people become very two things. You become very open and vulnerable about your emotions and
Right.
your, so it's often the case that women would not feel comfortable opening up to just a man in certain ways. But if there's a
Yeah.
male-female team, then the other part is that we call it the archaeology of trauma. That
Mm,
there's layers and layers and layers of trauma,
right.
often for many people going back to early childhood traumas.
Yep.
So to have a male-female co-therapy team when people end up in some of these regress states, this may be like the opportunity for a corrective experience where
Mm,
their own family of origin, they didn't have a well-working male-female team, or they were divorced, or they were arguing, or whatever.
right. Right.
But here, when you sort of moved into these earlier childhood wounds, to have a
Mm.
successful male-female team, it sort of recreates what didn't happen that should have happened earlier.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And you can kind of rewire those neural pathways of, oh,
Yeah,
I can actually feel safe in this situation with a male female supportive team that's got my
yeah,
back.
yes, exactly.
Oh, that's beautiful. So basically, you've created what seems to be the ideal circumstance for using this medicine along with therapy. And the goal is with the final phase 3 study data to present that to the FDA, have it approved, and then the next step is move forward with having insurance cover it.
Yeah,
Am
well,
I
hopefully,
encapsulating that in a basic way enough?
well, it's funny, the encapsulation, yeah, because it all comes out in capsules. People think it. But what we actually hope, and this is, we were already starting discussions with insurance companies, is that we want the insurance coverage to be there at the time of launch.
Yes.
That's what we're
Okay.
trying to do. Not to have a period of delay so that it only starts
Yeah.
when people can afford to pay for it themselves.
Right. And that's so critical because, as you mentioned, it's not going to be a cheap therapy.
Yeah. And then the other part is that we're also working with to just start with group therapy.
Mm, okay.
Yeah. So I think that will impact costs, and it will impact accessibility.
Uh,
And so that'll be one of the aspects. But we really feel that it's important to start with insurance coverage if we can manage that.
Okay. All right. Amazing. So, Rick, we are coming to the end of our time together, but I want to just let everyone know how they can support your work and the work of
Okay.
MAPS,
Yeah.
because I know that all of us want to see this happen. We want to support your work to get insurance companies to cover this. We want to support your incredible work with the clinical trials, moving toward FDA approval for MDMA. And then I know you'll start focusing on other compounds next. If I know you, I know you're not giving up anytime soon.
That's for sure.
You told me something along the lines of you're just someone who gets an idea and sticks with it. And we all
Well,
really appreciate you for that, Rick. So how can people support MAPS? And also, please tell us about something very special coming up in June.
okay. So thank you for that. Well, MAPS is a nonprofit organization. You can go, and now that it's December 19th, near the end of the year, near fundraising season, so people can go to maps.org and make donations. That would be really important. The other way that people can support us is indirectly, which is to tell your friends about psychedelics and to tell your parents. So we look at successful social change causes like gay rights and gay marriage. That's from people coming out and telling people,
Yeah.
that maybe you didn't know that I was gay. Now you see, and now you can appreciate.
Right.
I'm like everybody else, and so I think both donate to MAPS and then also think about doing this coming out, particularly
Mm.
people that are in your orbit that are especially frightened or nervous. Try to explain to them really what's going on. Then the other thing that's coming up is going to be the world's largest conference on psychedelics ever. And it's going to be June 19th to the 23rd in Denver, Colorado, 2023. And we're expecting, thousands up to 10,000 people. We've got the Denver Convention Center. It's going to be enormous, and really, it's a great place for networking. It's a great place to be learning about all that's happening in the field. And I will mention one other party that people can start thinking about, an event. It's April 8th, 2024.
Wow. Okay.
Now, April 8th is when I started MAPS in 1986. So April 8th, 2024 is the 38th anniversary of MAPS. And it should be right around the time that FDA approves MDMA, within days or weeks, or, we hope.
Amazing.
But the other part is that the universe has decided to celebrate MAPS's anniversary. And it's a full solar eclipse through much of North America. And the next time that will happen is 2044. Won't happen another 20 years. So on April 8th, 2024, we're planning to have a gathering on private land somewhere in the path of the eclipse. And it'll be kind of a MAPS and cosmic celebration. So
beautiful.
To that as well.
Amazing. Mark your calendars.
Yeah, but the next step will really be the June 19th to the 23rd in Denver at the Denver Convention Center, and
Psychedelic Science 2023.
Yeah. We've had ones that were Psychedelic Science in 2010, 2013, and 2017. The one in 2017 had 3,000 people. It's now currently the largest psychedelic conference ever in the world, but this one is going to be way bigger.
Absolutely. I can't wait. I'm sure everyone listening is going to be there. And now I'm marking my calendar for April 8th, 2024 as well. Sounds incredible. Yeah. Rick, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today, for sharing all of this information, for your tireless work on the mission and your huge, kind heart. And everyone out there, please donate to MAPS. There is no greater cause for helping humanity right now, as far as I'm concerned. MAPS.org. Follow along with Rick and his team's work. Thank you so much, Rick.
Yeah, and it's great to see you smiling and happy after your challenging experience that turned out to be energizing and enlightening, more than just overwhelming and frightening.
Yeah. Well, thanks to you, and, thanks to the power of these medicines, really. And like you said, each one of us, as we share our stories and our own healing, help to break the stigma. So if my suffering and coming through the other end can help others, then so be it. Thank you, Rick. Take care.
My pleasure. Okay, bye.